Welcome to Fanko Decodes. I am Fanko. Imagine for a moment that your existence is an error. Imagine that the very day you are born, the world decides you take up too much space. Now, imagine fighting for 40 years just to prove that you have the right to breathe, only to have a bullet aim for your heart on International Women's Day. How does a woman, born to be left in the sun to die, rise to become the only female deputy speaker of a parliament in one of the most dangerous places on earth? How does one hold on to sanity when your honeymoon ends in a torture chamber? And what happens when the democracy you built with your own blood collapses in a single afternoon? Today, we are not just telling the story of a politician. We are decoding the anatomy of resilience in its rawest form. This is the story of Fawzia Koofi. And to understand the bullet that shattered her window in 2010, we have to go back to a scorching afternoon in 1975, to a baby girl crying in the dust. Chapter 1. The Original Sin of Existence. The year is 1975. The location is the Badakhshan province of Afghanistan. To understand Badakhshan, you must erase the modern world from your mind. It is a land of staggering, brutal beauty-high mountains that scrape the sky, deep valleys that hold shadows for centuries. It is a place where geography is destiny. Here, civilization is measured not by electricity or internet connection, but by survival. In this remote corner of the world, life follows a script written 1,000 years ago. For a woman, the script is short and cruel. You are born. You serve. You breed. You die. If you are lucky, you survive past 40. If you are unlucky, and many are, you die in childbirth. Your life traded for another life that might also be extinguished before the winter ends. On a nondescript night in 1975, a midwife steps out of a mud brick room. There is no celebration on her face. No congratulations. She looks at the man waiting outside, Abdul Rahman Koofi, and shakes her head. Another daughter. Abdul Rahman is not just a father. He is a titan of his region, a member of parliament, a man of wealth and influence, a feudal lord in a land where tribal politics is the only law. But in this moment, he is just a disappointed man who already has 18 children. He looks at the bundle in the midwife's arms, the wrinkled face, the closed eyes, the shallow breath of a newborn. He turns his back. He walks away. His command is silent, but understood. Dispose of it. This is Fawzia Koofi's introduction to the universe. Unwanted, uncelebrated, an accounting error in the family ledger. She was the 19th child. Her father, following the customs of high-status Afghan men, had 7 wives. Do not mistake this for romance. In the context of Badakhshan in the 1970s, marriage was not a love affair. It was a corporate merger. It was a strategic alliance. You married a woman to secure a valley, to pacify a rival tribe, to expand your political footprint. The women were the currency of peace and power. Fawzia's mother was one of the lesser shareholders in this corporation. She came from humble origins. Her value lay in her obedience, her labor, and her fertility. In the Koofi household, the hierarchy was rigid. Women did not dine at the table. They ate the scraps left behind by the men and the sons. They were the unseen infrastructure of the house, silent, efficient, and easily replaced. But back to that day. When the father walked away, the midwife faced a dilemma. The custom for unwanted female infants in these harsh mountains was a practice of passive euthanasia. You didn't kill the child. You simply stopped keeping it alive. You withheld milk. You withheld warmth. You let nature correct the mistake. The midwife wrapped the infant Fawzia in a cloth and placed her outside in the courtyard, directly under the blazing, unforgiving sun. It was a test. Or perhaps a sentencing. If the baby survived the heat, the dehydration, the exposure, then maybe it was meant to be. If not, it was God's will. For hours, Fawzia lay there. The sun beat down on her eyelids. She cried until her throat was dry, until the sound was nothing more than a rasp. She was alone in a world that was actively trying to burn her out of existence. Then a shadow fell over her. It was her grandmother, the matriarch. She heard the weak, dying whimper of the infant. She walked over, lifted the scorching hot bundle from the dirt, and made a decision that would alter the course of Afghan history. She carried the baby back inside, to the mother who was lying exhausted and heartbroken on the bed. She placed the child in her arms and said, "This is your daughter. She has the right to live." That moment, that single act of defiance against the natural order, was the first political victory of Fawzia's life. She hadn't even opened her eyes, and she had already survived an assassination attempt by her own culture. Fawzia grew up as a ghost in her own home. In a family of 23 children, to be the 19th and a girl was to be invisible. She wore the hand-me-downs of hand-me-downs. She ate last. She learned to make herself small, to occupy as little space as possible. But children are observant. In the silence of her invisibility, Fawzia watched. She saw the power dynamics. She saw how her father commanded the room, and how her mother shrank into the walls. She realized early on that in this world, power was the only shield against suffering. She developed a survival mechanism that would serve her well in the viper pit of Kabul politics decades later: stoicism. She learned that tears were useless. Complaints were dangerous. To survive, you had to be useful, you had to be observant, and above all, you had to be resilient. But just as she was learning the rules of the house itself began to shake. Chapter 2. The Education of War. The year is 1979. Fawzia is 4 years old. In the capital, Kabul, the ground is shifting. A communist coup has taken place. The great game of superpowers is once again using Afghanistan as its chessboard. For a 4-year-old, communism and geopolitics are meaningless words. What Fawzia understands is atmosphere. She feels the tension tightening around the dinner table. Her father, the great Abdul Rahman, is no longer the confident lord of the valley. He is anxious. He holds secret meetings late into the night. Abdul Rahman was a man of the old world. He believed in dialogue. He believed that even enemies could sit down, drink tea, and find a middle ground. He thought his status as a member of parliament would protect him. He was wrong. The new world that was arriving in Afghanistan had no respect for the old codes of honor. In an attempt to mediate peace between the new government and the rising Mujahideen, the holy warriors, Abdul Rahman traveled into the mountains. He wanted to talk. The Mujahideen, suspicious of anyone connected to the state, saw him not as a bridge, but as a collaborator. He was kidnapped. He was put on trial in a kangaroo court of angry young men with guns. And then he was executed. When his body was brought back to the village, the sound of grief was not a cry, it was a roar. The women wailed, tearing at their clothes. The sons shouted for vengeance. But amidst this cacophony of grief, there was a small, silent figure. 4-year-old Fawzia walked up to the body of the father who had once left her in the sun. She touched his cold hand. She didn't cry. Psychologists call this dissociation. It is what happens when the human mind is confronted with a horror too vast to process. The breaker switch flips. You go numb. That night, keeping vigil by her father's corpse, Fawzia learned her second lesson. Safety is an illusion. The strongest man she knew, the king of her world, was just meat and bone like everyone else. If he could be extinguished, no one was safe. With the patriarch dead, the family became a target. The wolves were circling. Fawzia's mother, a woman who had spent her life in the kitchen, suddenly had to become a general. She gathered her children and fled. They left the mountains of Badakhshan for the city of Faizabad, and eventually to Kabul. They became refugees in their own country. The 1980s in Afghanistan was a decade of fire. The Soviet Union had invaded to prop up the communist regime. The Mujahideen, backed by the West, were fighting a holy war in the hills. Fawzia's childhood became a surreal montage of textbooks and bomb shelters. Her mother made a radical choice. Perhaps it was the desperation of a widow who realized that without a man, her daughters needed armor. That armor was education. Fawzia was sent to school. For a girl from a conservative tribal family, this was revolutionary. But school in 1980s Afghanistan was not a safe haven. It was a lottery. Every morning, Fawzia walked to school through streets that were effectively active war zones. She learned to distinguish the sound of incoming mortar fire from outgoing artillery. She learned which side of the street offered better cover from snipers. One afternoon, she and her classmates were pinned down in a shop as two rival militia factions opened fire on each other across the street. For 30 minutes, bullets chewed up the facade of the building. Inside, huddled behind sacks of rice, Fawzia didn't pray for a pony or a dog. She prayed that the caliber of the bullets wasn't high enough to penetrate the brick wall. When the shooting stopped, they walked out. On the street lay the body of a woman, a teacher from her school. Her papers were scattered in the bloody mud. Her eyes were open, staring at a sky that didn't care. Fawzia wanted to stop. She wanted to close the woman's eyes, but she couldn't. Her feet kept moving. Keep walking, her survival instinct whispered. Don't look. Don't feel. Just survive. This was the War Survival 101 curriculum. She saw neighbors dragged from their homes. She saw rockets dismantle apartment blocks like Lego sets. And through it all, she held on to a singular glowing ambition. She would become a doctor. Why a doctor? Because in the chaos of Afghanistan, a female doctor was the closest thing to a superhero. It was one of the few professions where a woman could command respect, where she could exist in the public sphere without being owned. Medicine was agency. Medicine was power. By the mid-1990s, against all odds, Fawzia had done it. She had graduated high school with top marks. She had passed the grueling entrance exams. She was a medical student at Kabul University. She was standing on the precipice of her dream. She could almost feel the stethoscope around her neck. And then the black flag rose. September 1996, the Taliban conquered Kabul. If the civil war was chaos, the Taliban era was a suffocating silence. It was a medieval winter descending instantly upon a 20th century city. Overnight, the decrees came down. Women were banned from work. Women were banned from school. Women were banned from leaving their homes without a male guardian, Maram. The burqa that blue, ghost-like shroud became mandatory. Fawzia went to the university gates, only to find them locked. Armed men with coal-rimmed eyes and whips stood guard. Go home, they spat. Go home and stay there. Her dream of being a doctor didn't just die. It was murdered by a government decree. She retreated to her room. She looked at her anatomy textbooks, now illegal contraband. For the first time since she was a baby in the sun, she felt the true weight of despair. What is the point of being brilliant, of being resilient, of being alive, if the world simply cancels you? She fell into a deep depression. But destiny, it seems, loves irony. Just as her professional life was being buried, her personal life was about to explode in the most unexpected way. Chapter 3. Love in the Time of Cholera. By 1997, Fawzia was 22 years old. In the West, this is the prime of youth. In Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, she was practically a spinster, an old maid. Her older brother, Rushakai, now the head of the household, was anxious to marry her off. But Fawzia was difficult. She was educated. She had opinions. She was spoiled by her intellect. She didn't want a master. She wanted a partner. Enter Hamid. Hamid was a rarity. A chemistry professor at Kabul University. An engineer. an intellectual who read poetry and believed in science. He had seen Fawzia from afar. Perhaps he noticed the defiant way she walked, even under the suffocating layers of fabric. He sent a proposal. Fawzia's brother was furious. The Koofis were political royalty. Hamid was a middle-class academic. He is nobody, the brother scoffed. He doesn't have the lineage. But Hamid was persistent. In a culture where men simply took what they wanted, Hamid courted. He agreed to exorbitant dowry demands, designed to scare him off. He showed respect not just to the family, but to Fawzia's potential. From behind a curtain, listening to the negotiations, Fawzia made a choice. She fought for him. She told her family, "This is the man I want." They married. The wedding was a muted affair. Under the Taliban, music was banned. Dancing was a crime. Joy was suspicious. They celebrated in hushed tones, afraid that a laugh too loud would attract the religious police. But inside their home, it was a sanctuary. On the morning after their wedding, Fawzia woke up to find Hamid in the kitchen, making tea. You must understand how radical this image is. In traditional Afghan culture, a man in the kitchen is a violation of the natural order. It is seen as weakness. Hamid smiled at her. "Rest," he said. "Marriage is a partnership. We share the load." For 10 days, Fawzia lived in a dream. She discovered that marriage didn't have to be the servitude her mother endured. It could be an intellectual friendship, a romance of equals. For 10 days, she forgot the Taliban, the war, the lost medical degree. She was happy 10 days. That was all the happiness the universe allotted her. On the 11th day, the door was kicked in. The Taliban intelligence officers stormed the house. They weren't looking for Hamid. They were looking for Fawzia's brothers, who were known resistance fighters. But the brothers were gone. Frustrated, angry, and needing a body to fill their quota, the commander pointed at Hamid. "Take him." Fawzia screamed. She threw herself at the soldiers, grabbing their rifles, begging, clawing. "He is a teacher. He has done nothing." A soldier shoved her back. He raised his rifle butt. Hamid shouted, "Fawzia, go back. Lock the door." They dragged him out. They threw him into the back of a pickup truck. As the truck sped away, kicking up dust, Fawzia sat on the threshold of her home. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Her husband was gone. Her brothers were in hiding. She was a woman alone in a city that hated women. The girl who survived the sun, the child who watched her father die, the student who dodged snipers, she was gone. In her place sat a woman who realized that tears would not save her husband. She stood up. She wiped her face. She put on the hated burqa, transforming herself into a faceless ghost. She was going to the prison. She was going to walk into the belly of the beast and demand her life back. Chapter 4. The warrior in the blue shroud Fawzia did not scream. She did not collapse. The time for the innocent bride was over. The time for the wartime negotiator had begun. In late 90s Kabul, for a woman to walk the streets alone was a crime. To walk into a Taliban detention center and demand an audience with the commander was suicide. But Fawzia put on her burqa, that mobile prison of blue polyester, and walked into the city. She was propelled by a singular, terrifying logic. If I do nothing, he dies. If I go, I might die, but he might live. She navigated a labyrinth of bureaucracy and brutality. She leveraged old tribal alliances. She used the only currency that still held value in a collapsing society, her father's name. "I am the daughter of Abdul Rahman Koofi," she told the guards, her voice steady behind the face mesh. The name carried weight. Even the Taliban, who despised the old parliament, respected the codes of tribal honor. A commander agreed to see her. Picture the scene. A dark, smoke-filled room. A man with a Kalashnikov and a worldview that belongs in the 7th century. And standing before him, a woman he considers property, demanding justice. It was a high-stakes poker game played with human lives. The commander was dismissive. "He is guilty by association," he said. "He married into a family of traitors." Fawzia countered, arguing law, arguing logic, arguing the very Islamic principles the Taliban claimed to uphold. Finally, she played her ace. She made it a matter of Pashtunwali, the ancient code of honor. To kill an innocent teacher, the son-in-law of a respected elder, would bring shame upon the commander's house. He blinked. "We will release him," the commander grunted. "But if your brothers are not found, on your head be it." It was a victory, but a Pyrrhic one. When Fawzia went to the prison gates to collect her husband, she didn't recognize him. The man who walked out was a specter. In just over a week, the Taliban had broken him. He had been beaten with cables, starved, and kept in freezing, filth-ridden cells. His back was a map of lacerations. His spirit was intact, but his body was failing. They went home, but the horror followed them. Hamid had contracted tuberculosis in the dungeon. In a city with no medicine, no functioning hospitals, and a regime that barely allowed women to speak to male doctors, his condition was a death sentence in slow motion. For the next few years, their life was a fugitive run. They moved from house to house, hiding from the Taliban, trying to find treatment for Hamid's decaying lungs. In this twilight existence, life somehow insisted on continuing. Fawzia gave birth to 2 daughters, Shura and Shaharzad. Hamid adored them. He would hold his baby girls with shaking hands, coughing blood into a handkerchief, whispering to them about a world where they could be free. He was dying, and he knew it. His love for them was the desperate love of a man who knows he won't see the end of the movie. Then came 2001. The Twin Towers fell. The B-52s arrived. The Taliban regime crumbled into the dust. For a brief, shining moment, there was hope. The doctors were coming back. The borders were opening. Fawzia immediately prepared to take Hamid to Iran for proper treatment. They were finally going to be free. But fate is cruel. The damage was too deep. The years of untreated infection, the malnutrition, the torture, it had eaten him away. In 2003, just as the dawn of a new Afghanistan was breaking, Hamid died. He didn't die from a bullet. He died from the accumulated trauma of a broken nation. Fawzia was 28, a widow, a single mother of 2. At the funeral, she stood over his grave. The society around her had a script ready for her, the tragic widow. She was expected to retreat, to wear black, to live on the charity of her brothers, to become a shadow in the corner of a room, just like her mother. But as the earth covered the only man who had ever treated her as an equal, something hardened inside Fawzia. She looked at her daughters. They had their father's eyes. And she realized that if she followed the script, her daughters would inherit her cage. That night, she made a pact with the ghost of her husband. "I will not be a victim," she whispered. "I will be the architect of a new world for them." Chapter 5. The resurrection post-2001 Afghanistan was the Wild West. It was a time of chaos, but also of intoxicating possibility. The international community was pouring billions into the country. The Constitution was being rewritten. Fawzia took off the burqa. She folded it and put it away, not as a keepsake, but as evidence of a crime she would never allow to be repeated. She started working for UNICEF, traversing the treacherous mountain roads to document the plight of children. She saw things that broke her heart: girls married off at 9, mothers dying in labor on dirt floors. And everywhere she went, people recognized the name, Koofi, the daughter of the man who tried to bring peace. In 2005, the first parliamentary elections were announced. The family council gathered. They needed a candidate for Badakhshan. The brothers looked at each other. Some were too controversial, some too old. Then, eyes turned to Fawzia. It was an insane idea. A woman? running for parliament in a province dominated by conservative warlords? They will kill you, her friends said. A woman's place is in the home, the mullahs preached. But Fawzia ran. Her campaign was not polished. It was gritty. She trekked through snow-blocked passes, stood on the backs of trucks, and spoke to crowds of men who had never heard a woman's voice amplified by a microphone. She didn't promise miracles. She promised dignity. She looked the warlords in the eye and said, "You have had the guns for 30 years. What have you built? Graves. Let me try building schools." The threats were constant. Letters pinned to her door. Phone calls describing how they would kidnap her daughters. This is where the legend of the letters to my daughters began. Every morning, before she left the house to campaign, Fawzia would write a letter to Shura and Shaharzad. These weren't just "I love you" notes. They were instructions. Here is where the money is hidden. Here is who you can trust. Here is how you must live if Mama doesn't come home tonight. She was writing her will in installments. But the message resonated. The women of Badakhshan, hidden for so long, came out in droves. They saw in Fawzia a reflection of their own suppressed strength. When the votes were counted, the results sent a shockwave through the establishment. Fawzia Koofi didn't just win. She won by a landslide. She entered parliament. And she didn't sit in the back row. She was elected as the second deputy speaker of the House, the first woman in Afghan history to hold such a rank. For the Taliban, now regrouping in the shadows, she became public enemy number one. She was a woman with power, a woman with a voice, a woman who wore a headscarf but refused to cover her face or her mind. She was an existential threat to their ideology. Chapter 6. The Bullet and the Table. This brings us back to that shattered window in 2010, when the gunman opened fire on her convoy, and she shielded her daughter with her own body. Fawzia wasn't just surviving an assassination attempt. She was living out the reality she had prepared for every single day. When she dusted the glass off her clothes and said, "We keep moving," it wasn't bravado. It was the grim acceptance of a soldier who knows the war isn't over. She survived 2010. She survived another attempt in 2014. By 2020, the world had changed again. The United States was looking for an exit. They pushed for peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban in Doha, Qatar. Fawzia was named as one of the few female negotiators on the government team. Think about the psychological magnitude of this. She was going to sit across a mahogany table from the very men who had ordered her death. She was going to negotiate the future of her country with the monsters who had tortured her husband. But just weeks before the talks were to begin, in August 2020, the Taliban tried one last time to silence her. On a highway near Kabul, gunmen ambushed her car again. A bullet tore through her right arm, shattering the bone. She was rushed to the hospital. Blood soaked her clothes. The pain was blinding. Lying in the emergency room, watching the doctors work on her arm, she had every reason to quit. She had given her father, her husband, her youth, and now her own flesh to this country. Enough, any rational person would say. Take your daughters and go to Paris. Go to London. Just go. But 3 weeks later, with her arm in a heavy cast and bandages concealed under her sleeve, Fawzia Koofi walked into the Sheraton Grand in Doha. She sat down at the table. She looked the Taliban representatives in the eye. They looked away. She didn't scream at them. She simply existed. Her presence was the ultimate act of defiance. By sitting there, broken but unbowed, she forced them to acknowledge that a woman was their equal. Epilogue. The long exile. We all know how this story ends. Or rather, how this chapter ends. August 5th, 10th, 2021. The fall of Kabul. The American planes departed. A government collapsed like a house of cards. The Taliban swept back into the city, 20 years of progress evaporating in 24 hours. Fawzia was placed under house arrest. Outside her window, The white flags of the Taliban replaced the tricolor flag of the Republic. She faced the final, agonizing choice: stay and become a martyr, a symbol that would be quickly erased, or leave and carry the story to the world. She chose to survive, not for herself, but for the witness she could bear. She was evacuated on one of the last flights out. As the plane lifted off, ascending over the Hindu Kush Mountains, she looked down at the land that had consumed everything she loved. Today, Fawzia lives in exile in London. The grey rain of England is a far cry from the blinding sun of Badakhshan. She is safe. Her daughters are safe. Shura and Shaharzad attend university. They wear jeans. They walk alone. They laugh out loud without fear of a whip. Sometimes, late at night, Fawzia looks at the scar on her arm. She looks at the empty chair where Hamid should be. She thinks of the millions of women back home who have been erased from public life, locked back behind the blue curtains. Did she lose? The cynic would say yes. The Taliban are back. The parliament is closed. The darkness has returned. But look closer. Remember the baby girl left in the sun to die in 1975? She was supposed to be nothing. Instead, she became a voice that echoed in the halls of the United Nations. She raised 2 daughters who are free women of the 21st century. She proved, once and for all, that you can kill a dreamer, but you cannot kill the dream. Fawzia Koofi's life is a testament to a single, indestructible truth. Resilience is not about never falling. It is about the refusal to stay down. She is the seed that was buried in the darkness, and the darkness thought it was an end. But the darkness was wrong. It was a planting. This is Fanko Decodes. History is often a circle of tragedy, but it is broken by those brave enough to stand in the path of the wheel. If this story moved you, if you believe that some voices must never be silenced, share this episode. Let the story of Fawzia Koofi travel further than any bullet ever could. Until next time, keep thinking, keep decoding.